Volkswagen is one of the big names in the automotive market, with 12 brands which include powerful names like Porsche, Bentley, Lamborghini and Bugatti. Over 44,000 cars are produced every day in over 100 car plants and serving a total of 150 markets. When a car manufacturer of this size completely turns around the production in order to go all electric, the process can be mind-boggling and very costly, $50 billion to be precise. This is the amount that Volkswagen plans to invest in electrification in the next 3 years at a global scale. The long-term goal is to fulfill the Paris Agreement and reach CO2 neutrality by 2050. Reinhard Fischer, SVP Volkswagen Group, gave a presentation at a recent event about decarbonization hosted by the National Academy of Science. He talks about the challenges of Volkswagen, but this can apply to any car company that is about to make the transition to electric cars. Here are the highlights.
We're going to spend $50 billion in invest in electrified products. This will translate into 70 all-new cars that we'll bring to the global market over the next basically 10 years. And we have a target of producing 1 million electrical cars by 2025. Part of that is our investment in Chattanooga in Tennessee, $800 million. We have an existing plant there that today produces the Passat and the Atlas, and we're going to expand that factory to be capable of producing electrical vehicles for the American market and for the Canadian market. So this is part of our commitment. The construction is already running, and we're hoping to have this factory up in about 2 years.
Volkswagen calls the transition project Go to Zero, and it does not address only what comes out of the tailpipe, but the whole production cycle. Car companies traditionally operate in long cycles, so to meet the 2050 deadline of the Paris Agreement, a car company has to complete smaller tasks in between.
But what does it really mean to say you want to be CO2 neutral by 2050? One thing I'm going to show you in the automotive industry is that we're working with quite some long cycles. So if we want to be carbon neutral by 2050, actually we need to have a CO2 neutral vehicle fleet much earlier, about 10 to 12 years earlier in the market to reach that stage that by 2050 we only sell carbon neutral vehicles. And it's a sliding path towards there. We cannot replace what we're producing in 1 year. It takes us time, and I'll explain that a little bit more. But when we talk about CO2 reduction, we call this internally our Go to Zero strategy. We're looking at the complete life cycle. So we're not only looking at what's coming out of the tailpipe, which is the use phase in the middle, which is of course has been, and that's where the government regulations are kicking in. But we're also looking in on production. The Audi e-tron, which is the first electrical car that we are bringing to market, is being produced in Brussels, and that factory is already completely CO2 neutral. And we're going to attempt to bring all our factories to exactly that stage. And then end of life, when you talk about batteries, big batteries in the cars, you need to think about what happens when they have reached the end of their life cycle. Is there a second use, or even after second use, how do you recycle the batteries in making sure that you don't create an environmental problem with the discharged batteries? And our focus is we want to avoid CO2 where we cannot avoid it completely. We want to reduce, and that means we're still going to emit CO2, and for that we're going to look for compensation measures so that we can say that we are CO2 neutral.
Car manufacturing is a very intensive capital industry, and the challenges come from three main components: product planning, manufacturing, and suppliers. Within this triangle, timing is also a very important factor. Here is how each component is addressed at Volkswagen.
If we're looking at a car that we're bringing to market right now, SUV, electric combustion engine, We have been working on that car internally for about 4 years. And up to the point that we bring the car to market, depending on how big the change is, we have spent up to several $billion invested in that car. So that's now, of course, something that the consumer is not going to pay you back at once, but you need to take a look over the next 7-8 years, make a calculation about how many cars you're going to sell, and each car gives you a contribution back to the money that you invested. So we have to be aware of that whole timeline, and that makes my job so difficult. It was so easy in the past. We built beautiful cars, so probably more horsepower than the one before, design gets sleeker, and off we go. Now we have to look at the questions that I have put down there. What will consumers really ask? How many electrical cars? And with our investment, we're certainly betting that there will be a surge of acceptance of a new technology like we have seen with the iPhone. It's only 10 years in the market, or 11 in the meantime, and we cannot imagine to live without it anymore, and it's accepted part of our daily life. Our hope is clearly that electrical vehicles will go exactly the same path. That's why we're investing heavily in that area. But it's a question of timing. As I said before, probably around 2040, all our cars are going to be electric, and we'll take combustion engine cars off the market. But what is the right path in between? If we move too fast and consumers don't buy the electrical cars, then we are hitting our overall sales target, which is important for our return on sales. If we don't move fast enough, we're getting left behind, and we're piling up the ICE cars because the customers don't want to buy them anymore. What is the legal framework going to be? There's a lot of discussion right now what exactly the benchmarks are. And I think the important part is we're not doing this to be compliant with the legal requirement. We're doing this because we believe it's the right thing. But still, we need to be aware of what are the legal requirements and be in compliance with them. And that's where we need stability and also allow us a long-term planning. And then, of course, there's the question, what will the competition do?
Competition is a concern for all traditional car manufacturers planning to launch electric vehicles. Ted Kennis, Global Director of Electrification at Ford Motor Company, summarized it best when he presented the Mustang Mach-E, the new electric Ford SUV.
100 net new competitive nameplates by 2025 was our latest estimate. And we're guessing about 8.5% full battery electric here. And you go, well, that's a lot. Even if it was half that, it would be a lot versus today. Europe, 150 nameplates. China, 350. Maybe 15% of the industry, maybe 14%. Again, it's a lot.
This is just the model cycle. When you look at production, exactly the same is happening. So I showed you the chart, $800 million investment in Chattanooga. Again, that's nothing that you get back overnight. You plan this with a 10, 15-year planning horizon. And in that time point, we're going to produce in Chattanooga over 1 million electrical cars, and each one of them needs us to give a little bit back on the investment that we're making in the factory. Suppliers, one of our partners is right now making a huge investment in Georgia in a battery plant, the production of battery cells, with a capacity of providing battery cells for up to 150,000 cars per year. That supplier is not making that investment just because it's fun. No, when they do that investment, they talk to us a lot about what is the commitment, what is the fallback, what if your electric cars don't sell, what are we going to do with our battery cells, and. So in this triangle between our product planning, our production capability, and the supplier, it's all a game of huge capital and long times of getting a return on that capital. But what we are doing as Volkswagen, we're looking from beginning when we start developing the car to the time that we recycle the car is not going to be enough if we want to achieve our objective. We need the energy providers to also move into clean energy, because if we build electrical cars but all the power comes from dirty coal plants, then we have not achieved a lot. We need the whole transportation sector. So I don't know if anyone of you has done this. There are a lot of tools on the web where you can calculate your personal carbon footprint. Enter a flight, for example, a flight from the US to Europe. and you'll be amazed about that effect that has to your personal CO2 footprint. So I'm reconsidering every flight that I'm taking. What is the rest of the automotive industry doing? What are politics doing? What is the society doing? But also what are every one of us individually doing by looking at our carbon footprint and by adjusting our own behavior at home, at work, how we get there, how we get back home. So it is a daunting task, but sometimes small things make a huge difference. And this is not an announcement of a name change, but one letter can make a huge difference.